Hello, good morning, everybody. This is Mike McGinn. I'm the Executive Director of America Walks, and welcome to the next 5 years, Congress and federal policy. We talked a little bit about the name. We hope that that was a little more enticing than reauthorization. People said that sounded too technical, but that's actually what we're going to be talking about. And I'm going to give you a little primer on transportation reauthorization in a minute. But before we get to that, um, there I am. And first, I just want to thank our partners, in particular. I want to thank our partners who are supporting us. And you can be a partner too by making a contribution to uh, American Walk. So please think about supporting us. We have two great speakers coming up, and I'm going to introduce them after I give a little primer on reauthorization. I also want to say, if you look down at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little Q&A function. If you have questions, type them into the Q&A. We might be able to answer them on the fly, and we will elevate as many questions as we can to our panelists, Beth Osborne from Transportation for America, or actually Smart Growth America, and Marisa Jones from the Safe Routes Partnership. So let's talk about transportation reauthorization for a minute. In theory, every 5 years, Congress passes a transportation reauthorization bill that sets policy and sets spending levels for the next 5 years. I say in theory because in practice, there are often extensions. And this year is the year when Congress is supposed to pass a new reauthorization, although we're already hearing that this is unlikely this year. And if you look at the history, this is unsurprising. Now, transportation is very different from the rest of federal spending. It's on an annual, vast majority of other federal spending is on a 1 year cycle for appropriations. Every year there's a new appropriation. That's true for transportation too, but it's a 2 year cycle for coming up with the rules. And transportation just has this much longer time frame. That's because, in its wisdom, Congress created a transportation trust fund designed to operate outside of the regular congressional funding cycles. It had a designated tax, the gas tax, and its proponents argued that major infrastructure projects required dependable long-term funding. And this was, developed in the era of building out the interstate highway system. Well, decades later, now the gas tax is woefully inadequate. Congress pumps in general fund dollars to keep the trust fund balanced. And also, every 5 years, as a result of this, Congress has to be re-educated about what is at stake. Unlike other bills, which are regularly talked about, this one comes about only once every 5 years. The last reauthorization under Biden was the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or the IIJA. And while it has some new programs, I'm going to skim over this. There's much more nuance and detail, but I'll skim over. While it has some new programs, for example, reconnecting communities programs or other specialized granting programs, in many respects, in order to get 60 votes from the Senate and be a bipartisan bill, it largely continued the practices of the past. So what exactly does reauthorization fund? I will leave it to the presenters to dig in further, but here are some just salient high point. Most of the money goes straight to the states to use as they see fit. They're called formula funds. And those formula funds are 80% highways, 20% transit. Although there is the ability to flex some of the highway funds for transit, which some states use. The remainder goes out to states for specialized purposes or are discretionary grant programs from USDOT. For example, we are often promoting Safe Streets for All grants from the federal government and urging states and others to apply. How big is federal transportation funding in relation to all other spending? A little hard to measure because so many dollars come in from state, county, and other local levels, but 20 to 25% of the overall transportation dollars come from the federal government. And it's important because those additional dollars can sway local spending priorities. As you can imagine, if there's an opportunity to get some money from the feds for a specific thing, folks will lean that way because the desire to make their local dollars go further. So, as I said, in theory, Congress should reauthorize this year. Congressional leaders started off the year saying they would, um, but it appears they're now admitting that this is unlikely to happen in an election year. So why care? And this is why we're holding this webinar. This is actually the time when the public probably has the greatest influence. Members of Congress are introducing bills on specific topics and collecting co-sponsors as a way of earning a place in the ultimate reauthorization bill. The more support they can show, the more likely they are to get that in the final bill. These are called marker bills. Advocates are sharing principles for transportation or direct requests to members of Congress. Congressional leadership are drawing up their own outlines of what they want in reauthorization. So what could we expect? And actually, this is not completely predictable. But the structure of the bill has been remarkably consistent over time. There have been changes. But what's important to know right now is the Trump administration has, and some leadership in Congress has indicated they want a roads and bridges bill, basic infrastructure. The Trump administration has previously said grants that include reducing lane capacity for vehicles with bike lanes or pedestrian infrastructure are hostile to cars and counter to the Department of Transportation's priority of preserving or increasing roadway capacity for motor vehicles. So we're getting some real early indications that there's going to be a fight over what's in the bill. And lurking behind all this is, what does Congress do about an administration that has withheld billions of grants previously authorized, appropriated, in some cases even approved? So for example, the Chicago Transit Authority has started litigation claiming that transit funds were withheld to punish Chicago leadership for its political views. Many cities and towns are quietly worried that promised grant funds will never materialize, but they don't necessarily speak up for fear of making the situation worse. And as I mentioned above, the gas tax can't possibly pay for everything. So, and no one wants to raise the gas tax, but it can't possibly fund everybody's wish list. So what will happen? Well, that's why we're all engaged here. But our main purpose here is to educate you about some of the issues at stake, so you can choose as an individual, or you can choose through whatever organization you belong to, in or out of government, to begin thinking about how to interact with government in order to get the bill that you want. So we have some great guests to talk about this further. So I probably went a little longer than I wanted to, but our first speaker will be Marisa Jones from the Safe Routes Partnership. She's she's been working there since I got here, and five plus years ago, and she's been a great partner in safer streets for all. And I also she will be followed by Beth Osborne, who is from Smart Growth America, also here before I started my job, and I am grateful that both of them have agreed to come and share their knowledge and perspectives moving forward. So with that, I am going to stop sharing and turn it over to Marisa. And again, bring your questions to the Q&A section, and look forward to a robust discussion when they finish their presentations.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Mike. I am getting my slides into presentation mode. And hi, everyone. I can't think of a group of people more excited to talk about federal transportation policy than me, Beth, and Mike. So we are so glad you're here for the party. I promise to make it as fun as possible. All right. So I'm going to talk to you today about mobility, health, and local impact priorities in surface transportation reauthorization. As Mike mentioned, with the Safe Routes Partnership, we are a national nonprofit that works to make it easier, safer, and more joyful for kids to walk and bike to and from school and throughout their communities. We are celebrating our 20th anniversary. And we are really celebrating 20 years ago, our organization worked with Congress to create the federal Safe Routes to School program that brought over $1 billion in funding and supportive policies to build the safe places to connect kids on foot and on bike to their schools, and the programming and evaluation to really make the greatest impact. So how does our organization work to advance federal transportation policy? We do this in a number of ways. We represent the interests of the Safe Routes to School movement on Capitol Hill and with federal agencies. And as Mike talked about, reauthorization only happens every 5 years or so, not to mention extensions. So we serve as the institutional knowledge for programs like Safe Routes to School and transportation alternatives. We really explain to staff, this is how this program has worked, and here are the opportunities for improvement. I'm looking at some of the names in the participant list, and some of you are some of our greatest allies in this work. We engage with our field. We conduct and review research to hear about what's working and what could be improved. We maintain and cultivate relationships with members of Congress and agency staff. The member of Congress we worked with 20 years ago to create the federal Safe Routes to School program is no longer alive. And so over 20 years, we've had to cultivate new partners, nurture new champions. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a couple minutes. We also draft legislation. We write policy language, and then we advocate for Congress. We advocate for that language. And then, of course, so much of reauthorization happens in the off years. We are constantly tracking and analyzing program spending, understanding what's working, what's not working. And then we work to build support for bills. So by educating you and educating our field, educating the public at large, we help the people connect to our elected body in Congress to say, this is what we want. This is what matters to us. Please use your position to reflect our priorities. From the start, our organization has truly valued the connection between local work and federal policy. I'll spare you the history lesson on how we advocated for the federal Safe Routes to School program, but ultimately it came out of lifting up local work and bringing those voices to Washington, D.C. And over 20 years, that has really been our recipe for advancing meaningful and impactful public policy and federal funding to advance safe routes to school, walking, and bicycling. So I know that many of you are public health adjacent or interested in active mobility. So I want to talk today about our priority bills and how you can plug in on 3 key issues. Safe routes to school, which is one of only 14 high five, so health impact within 5 years initiatives from the CDC, and an evidence-based strategy in the community guide for those of you who are serious public health folks. We're going to talk about the Transportation Alternatives Program, which is the largest source of formula dollars for walking, biking, and safe routes to school. And then we're going to talk about safety provisions, because we know that concerns about safety are one of the top concerns for reasons people don't walk and bike throughout their communities. So Safe Routes to School, our key ask this year is to reinstate statewide Safe Routes to School coordinators. Why is that? I think anybody who has a job can relate to this. If your manager comes to you and says to your team, this program needs to get implemented, but doesn't designate anybody to do it and doesn't allocate any specific resources, it turns into this kind of like dibs not, like, okay, nobody's really going to do it. Or it takes that one person, and again, I see a couple of you on the participant list who are like, yes, this matters. I am going to make this happen. But ultimately, at the end of the day, programs without staff don't get implemented. I talked about the former Safe Routes to School federal program. Every state used to have a coordinator, now about half do. So we get this nice counterfactual where we can see states that have them versus states that don't. And our biannual state report cards reveal that having a state Safe Routes to School coordinator in your Department of Transportation portends countless benefits for the health, safety, and efficacy of young people walking and wheeling to school. And here are some of those benefits. If this bill were to pass, it could mean a champion within your state DOT for walking, for biking. Who doesn't want that? It can mean more access to funding, program sustainability, constituency building. Safe Routes to School is visible and tactile and in our neighborhoods. It's not just reaching people who identify as transportation advocates. It's reaching parents and caregivers every day who are trying to figure out how to get their kid to school. And it can reinstate a renewed focus on walking and biking. And for your future viewing leisure, here are some of the things that could happen if Safe Routes to School coordinators and funding materialize. The good news is we have bipartisan bills in both the House and the Senate. And both on the left, we have the House bill. These are two brand new champions for safe routes to school. And on the Senate side, these are champions that we've nurtured over many, many years. And so here it details the difference between the bills, how they're structured. But at the end of the day, they both have the goal of reinstating safe routes to school coordinators. On the House side, it's structured as an incentive if your state has a state safe routes to school coordinator. Your local match requirement for safe routes to school programs is only 5% instead of 20%. So really lowering one of the greatest barriers to accessing federal transportation dollars for local communities. On the Senate side, where it's led by Republican Kevin Cramer of North Dakota, this is just structured as plain and simple requirement. This is endorsed by a ton of national, state, and local organizations. Moving on to the Transportation Alternatives Program and safety provisions. So we are working right now with a coalition of 5 other national organizations, our friends, the League of American Bicyclists, Rails to Trails Conservancy, People for Bikes, American Trails, and American Hiking Association on a campaign called Keep America Active. And we are really working to lift up organizational voices, local elected officials, and businesses who have over 1,200 people have come, 1,200 organizations have come together to say these programs that bring money to our local communities for walking and biking and improve safety matter to us, and we are paying attention. So I'm going to highlight what some of our the key agreements that our 6 organizations and these 1,200 signers from across the country have come to and have requested Congress sign on to. And it's really exciting because we have such strong representation from every state in the nation that shows that there's widespread support. So the first ask is to maintain a robust transportation alternatives program. What is the Transportation Alternatives Program, or TAP? This is money that every single state gets, and then there's money for small communities, mid-sized communities, smaller cities, and big cities. And it's money for sidewalks, crosswalks, bike lanes, safe routes to school projects and programs, trails, and more. It is uniquely designed to support local priorities. So in the opening, Mike talked about a lot of the formula money goes to your state Department of Transportation, and they get to decide what to do with it. Transportation Alternatives is unique because it's for local communities to raise their hand and say, this is what I want. So this is very unique within federal transportation funding and policy and law. And I already talked about these other things. So here again, you'll get all these slides, but here's who is eligible to apply: local governments, nonprofits, small MPOs, school districts, etc., and the wide variety of things that this program can fund. In the IIJA, or Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, there were incredible gains made to this program, including an increase of 60% in funding, limitations on transfers, on the state being able to just give this money to other uses. So it was a really expansive year for the Transportation Alternatives Program. So our key ask is to maintain those wins. We really recognize the environment that we're operating within. It's not an expansive time. Right now, Congress is really looking to consolidate programs, and Transportation Alternatives is one of those programs that they're looking to consolidate. And we have come together with these 1,200 signatories and 5 other national orgs to say, no, we want this to remain robust. There are bills that we have in Congress, bipartisan, both chambers, including the Langenkamp bill, that we have improvements to suggest, and we are advocating for those very vociferously on the Hill. But at the end of the day, the core message is to maintain this program that is so critical for walking, biking, safe routes to school, and for really getting local priorities funded. The second big agreement is related to safety. I'm just going to give the high level here, and then you can look at the specifics later. There's a program called the Highway Safety Improvement Program. It is intended to keep people safe on our roads. And in the IIJA, there were 2 new provisions that basically said money that is intended for keeping people safe on our roads needs to include non-motorists as well, if those people are being killed on our roadways. Before IIJA, less than 1% of that Highway Safety Improvement Program spending was spent on non-motorists even though more than 20% of people dying on the roads were non-motorists. So there were these two new provisions, the vulnerable road user safety assessment that says states, you have to figure out where people not in cars are being killed, and you got to plan and strategize for how to prevent that from happening. And then a second provision, the vulnerable road user special rule that says, and if more than 15% of the people dying on your roads are not in cars, you have to spend at least 15% of that safety money on keeping them safe. This applies to more than 30 states and has meant $350 million.
Beth, floor is yours.
Thanks so much. And hopefully my internet will cooperate today. I'm normally the one causing this trouble. All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here today. I know that this is an issue that we're all focusing on and concerned about. I am Beth Osborne. I am the President and CEO of Smart Growth America, but Transportation for America is part of the family of programs that we have at Smart Growth America. Smart Growth America looks at all parts of the built environment, and we seek to make sure that investments in transportation, housing, brownfield redevelopment, all the parts of what makes a great community are focused on investments that will make a community prosperous, healthy, and resilient. So transportation, obviously a big part of that, and usually a part of making it worse in those three areas. So I'm going to start off with a question. I'm going to ask folks to, in the chat, or in Q&A even, to just put in, oops, I'm cheating here. First three people get to have a big say. Why do we have this program? What is the point of it? What are we expecting to get from these investments? Let's see if we have anyone.
They can't quite put it in the chat. I don't think the chat is open to everybody, but they can.
Can they put it in the Q&A?
You can put it in the Q&A, and I will answer them so everybody sees them.
All right. Well, I'm gonna. Oh, here we go. Yep, we got it. People staying alive on roads. Can you believe I did this recently and I never got anyone to say safety? I got like 20 responses. Safety was not one of them. Reduce fatalities. Perfect. All right. I'm going to call it because I think that this is the important issue that should be the number one issue. And we also have make sure transportation is funded without interruption. I would argue that I only want transportation to be funded if it's funding good things. And so I want to see those reduced fatalities. I want to see saved lives. I want to see our system in good condition. So this is what our federal code says about it. It has the 7 priorities, but I have to point out that 3 of them are really the same thing. And when you look at the regulations that support this section, congestion reduction, system reliability, freight movement, they all really mean making sure the cars don't slow down too much when a lot of cars are on the road. So you've got safety, infrastructure condition, congestion reduction, environmental sustainability, and they have reduced project delivery delays because Congress doesn't know the difference between goals and tactics, but we're going to forgive them for that today. So let's look at how they perform in those areas. In terms of safety, we find that the United States is quite the outlier when it comes to our so-called peer countries, certainly in terms of wealthy countries. Hungary, which is not a terribly wealthy country, has roadways that are twice as safe as ours. And if you look through all the countries of the world, you will find many countries that are really struggling to develop with very little money, doing way better than us in terms of keeping their roads safer and having fewer people die on them. We're known for our report, Dangerous by Design. And what we see is even though we see our roads get a little bit safer and a little bit more dangerous, and then COVID, they got way more dangerous because the roads were wide open and they're overbuilt, so people went super fast. But no matter what happens with overall fatalities, pedestrian fatalities stay quite pretty much on the wrong path, with a 75% increase in the number of pedestrians killed. since 2010. So safety performance, not good. In terms of repair, we've really had no meaningful progress in the past 20, 25 years. Our roads have gone from a D to a D plus. Our bridges have gone from a C to a C. And that is in spite of a series of bills that were touted as record-breaking, generational spending, all that sort of thing. So not getting much in terms of repairing what matters or what we already have, because it's too much fun to build a new thing that we can't afford to maintain. And the reason we do this is because congestion is a problem, and we want to fix congestion by building lots of new and wider roadways. And by doing that, we're going to make life so much more convenient. But when we studied it, we found that even though we're building more highways, more highway capacity than the population growth, we are seeing a massive increase in congestion. This of the 100 most populous communities, every single one of them saw congestion go up, including communities losing population. So if you can have fewer people and sometimes more capacity and still have everyone go slower, it's not capacity that's the issue. But this is the reason no one wants to invest in the things we care about in terms of safety and repair, because they feel like throwing more money down this hole is going to work. And then the IIJA was supposed to be somewhat a climate bill, but we've investigated and looked at how money is being spent. And while there are many programs that will do great things to reduce our carbon emissions, we're doing so much more to increase our carbon emissions. Overall, it's going to have a big net increase in emissions. And it's not just carbon, it's all of the criteria pollutants that make kids sick and give us cardiovascular problems. So one thing I want to point out is if you want to look at how your state is doing, how they're performing, you can see what targets they're setting in terms of affecting safety and repair and things like that, and whether or not they're actually meeting the targets they set. My home state of Louisiana actually has set targets to increase the number of people who are dying on their roadways, and they have exceeded even that increased target. So they're targeting more people to die on their roadway, and they are beating their targets. And that's what we're getting for generational investment. And there's all kinds of information on our website. I really hope people use it. We put this together because we thought Federal Highways was hiding this information, and we're giving it away for free. So I really hope that as you're working locally, you go and get this information so that you can, show your elected officials and maybe seek a little more accountability. So what do you need to know as we go forward? And Mike's talked a little bit about it. Marisa's talked a little bit about it. We have some primers on our website, Reauthorization 101 and 201, to help people understand how the process works. And I really appreciate what both of them said about how you can't wait for when the vote happens. That's too far down the line. Most of the debate happens as reauthorization bills are being written, and they're being negotiated right now. And I have seen a Democratic Congress turn over to a Republican Congress and they just bring the same bill they negotiated last time with almost no changes. So it really matters that you raise your hand and talk to your congressional representatives about what matters to you. I'm going to reemphasize this slide that Mike used from us about how extensions always happen. And if you look after Safety Lou, which is when we created the Safe Routes to Schools program. I was in the Senate at the time. You'll notice there was a 33 months worth of extensions, 10 different extensions before we got to MAP 21, which was only a 2-year bill, which is really a glorified extension. There was very little policy in there. And then another 14 months of extensions. So really, this was years and years of extensions before they came up with a way to pay for a longer bill. And we would have seen a similar thing happen before the IIJA if it had not been sold as an economic rescue package. So extensions should be expected, and extensions are more likely in times where there's not enough money to cover the bills. And there's not enough money to cover the bills. There's already been discussions from the Trump administration. Maybe we'll just throw the transit program out of the formula. And what you can see here is in red is the projected gas tax revenues. And that was before gas prices started going through the roof. Keep in mind, this was on the notion that gas was going to be cheap. And it wasn't enough to cover the highway formula program on its own. So if you threw transit and passenger rail and all of the competitive grants we love out of the program, it's still not enough to cover highways. That is a big problem, because if they come forward and say, throw all this other stuff out of the program and then turn away and say around and say, please help us come up with extra money, that's not going to be the big tent they need to come up with extra money. And that means there's real ability to influence the process right now. As Rahm Emanuel has often said, never let a good emergency go to waste, or a good crisis. So let's look at what the state DOT priorities are. They're relatively consistent over time. You'll see that they want to prioritize formula-based federal funding, and there's some good reasons for that. It gives them a lot more predictability, especially for bigger and more complex projects. But you get it. Give us the money that we have full discretion over, and then you go do something else. Increase flexibility. Not much in terms of accountability here. Just give us the money and let us figure it out. And let's not talk about outcomes and the things we should be delivering. Streamlining, get rid of regulatory burdens. Again, we want to do what we want to do. And now they're just straight out asking for an annual increase that keeps up with inflation, and they don't really care where it comes out of. It can come out of the general fund, which is interesting because the reason we have 5-year bills with guaranteed funding is because the user is supposed to be paying. But as we're headed into the next reauthorization, the user will be paying only about 60% at best of the program, which means the transportation program shouldn't get any protection. And just like education and housing and every other program should have to seek annual appropriations. Here are our priorities. We would like to see safety be a priority, and a more important priority than vehicles moving fast. Right now, it's the reverse. We think there should be a fix-it-first approach, and we would like to see a real concerted, decades-long effort to invest in all the non-highway modes the way we spent the last 70 years focusing on highways. You can get lots of detail. I'm not going to get into it today. On our website, we have many, many, many ideas on how to make this program work much, much better. And I just want to say, as I close out, we as a movement have often gotten something we care about. So maybe it's the carbon reduction program, and we have tolerated the rest of the program because we got something we wanted. But that's how we get to our modeling that shows we're going to have a lot more carbon emissions, because 2% being spent on a carbon reduction program does not even out so much of the rest of this pie going to increasing emissions. And if you look at my favorite program, it's a tie between Reconnecting Communities and Safe Streets and Roads for All, but there's Safe Streets and Roads for All, and that gigantic pie over there is being spent in ways that make our roads more dangerous for all. So we have to think about whether or not this great get is worth it if overall everything is going to get worse. And even when we love programs, this administration has found ways to come in and cancel the programs that we really care about, including Safe Streets and Roads for All. In fact, they are particularly going after biking and walking and saying that anything that appears to reduce space for cars is going to be a problem. So winning these programs doesn't help if the administration's not going to spend it the way the bargain said that they would. And you have to wonder why we would send hundreds of billions of dollars out there to harm safety if the programs we get for safety aren't being honored. So I'm going to quit at this point. You can see where my organization's coming from. I'm not comfortable, greenwashing a program that's damaging so many of our priorities. So we are asking how much better this program has to get before it's worth supporting at all. And our answer is so much better. Not little programs, massive fundamental change.
Marisa, do you want to try to come back and quickly wrap up your presentation? See if we got you back.
I'm so sorry, folks. I don't know what's going on with my internet today. I think the main thing that I'll say, and you can all have my slides and you'll be able to watch the presentation, but the biggest thing that I'll say is there, as Beth talked about, as I talked about, as Mike talked about, this is when we need to be influencing the process. This is when all of these marker bills that I talked about, they're being negotiated and either included or not included. And you can still, your voice matters. So I can drop a link. There are ways to influence this process. I dropped a link in the chat. Please sign on as an organization if these programs matter to you. And then the other thing that I'll just say is partnership in our name is not just a cute part of our name. It's really how we achieve our work. I started my presentation by talking about local policy and federal policy influence one another. And also organizations like Safe Routes Partnership that has a much narrower scope of work. And we work on these very discrete, defined programs, and organizations like Smart Growth America that have a much larger, more expansive view. We work in partnership. So even though what Beth and I are talking about might seem like really different approaches, and they are, our organizations find ways to work together. Smart Growth America is so effective at pulling the conversation to what is possible. And our organization is really focused on how do we make meaningful change on the ground so that everyday people can engage in this process. And it doesn't remain just this esoteric policy wonk conversation. So we really appreciate our partnership with all of you. We appreciate our partnership with Smart Growth America, and look forward to all of you participating in this process of reauthorization. And I'm really sorry about my technical difficulties. The weather's not great in Philly today, but shouldn't be bad enough that I don't have the internet. So I apologize.
Your phone is working great.
Great.
So let's pop into the questions. And it's interesting because I thank you, where you went is where some of the folks in the Q&A went. And obviously this creates one of the so this is the question that does not have an answer. But I am hoping there's going to be some discussion about the projected flow of funding for these projects in the coming 1 to 5 years under the current federal circumstances. And I think that highlights, I'll give a short answer and then I'll see what Beth and Marisa want to say. I don't think we can predict what this bill will look like right now. That's my personal take. I think that while there has been for a very long time, and I don't have the experience of either Beth or Marisa in this, so I defer to them when they share. But the fundamental structure of the reauthorization has remained quite similar for some time, and so there's always an expectation, I think, that it will remain the same. But I think some of the challenges with the trust fund make it different, and I also think, kind of the hostility of some members of Congress and the administration, anything besides roads and bridges is makes it a little more of a wild card as to what might come out in the end. So that echoes Marisa's comment. Now's the time to speak up about what you value, because no matter what you would accept as a final solution, making sure that your values are out on the table, or as a final reauthorization bill, as a final reauthorization bill, what getting your values and input into it, now's the time. Beth, you want to make a prediction, and then Marisa, or not make a prediction, one or the other?
It's really impossible to know. It depends on what the top line is. Right now, the leaders are saying they want to see the program grow at least as much as inflation, which is a lot, and they don't have enough money to maintain them as they are. And like I said, they didn't have enough money before gas prices went through the roof, which is generally gets people to buy more fuel efficient cars, buy less gasoline, and so our receipts go down. So I mean, and the other thing is, the big question is, are we going to agree that yes, in fact, we must have programs we're not particularly fans of funded at 30 times the programs we do care about? Because if so, it's a much more expensive proposition. it's really hard to predict what they're going to do. I think they're going to just punt for 2 years. That's when well, it might be 18 months looking at the increase in gas prices to hopefully be inspired. But boy, in 18 months after what might happen because of oil prices going so far high up, I don't know. Maybe they'll come up with another stimulus package, and they could try to do something different, or they could try to do a lot more of the same, which does not come out real well for us.
Marisa?
Yeah, I did not include my favorite GIF in this presentation, which is a crystal ball, because none of us have a crystal ball. In every federal transportation policy, somebody asks the crystal ball question. So, what I would point to here, so somebody's curious about the projected flow of funding over the next 1 to 5 years for these programs. When we look, like, I'm a student of political science. I look to history to inform predictions about the future and take into account current events. And as Beth and Mike both talked about, like, extensions are so normal. And so when I think about the short term, I think about for the formula programs, like they're probably going to be extended at level or at level funding. I think the discretionary programs are where it's an open question. So I think for programs that are core formula programs, like some of the ones that I talked about, transportation alternatives, highway safety improvement program, when we look at history to inform our best predictions for the future, we think those will probably continue. And then, Beth talked about like beyond an extension, what that could look like.
So, yeah, those great answers. Thank you, both of you, for doing your best to peer into the crystal ball. And I'd also point out, we are in pretty uncertain political times and expecting perhaps a different composition of the Congress after November, but the administration will remain the same. So I think, and who knows what's going on with the economy. All of these things are really confounding factors for
Also,
how this might shape up.
Democrats haven't changed this program either, so I don't think just waiting for the next Democratic administration gets us much without really demanding change. I mean, the IIJA, like I said, it's going to blow up emissions. There's going to be so many more because of something that so-called climate leaders passed. I think we've got a lot of work ahead of us.
So there was a question of strong towns has been talking about the idea that the US DOT and state DOTs are still in the mode of building out the interstate system, even though that project has been completed. This funnels most money to highway expansion projects rather than local mobility. What do you think of this idea? I'll throw that to Beth first.
Well, I'm actually going to be at the Strong Towns convening, and Chuck Marone and I are going to have a conversation about this. I think we agree that the current program is delivering far too little in terms of benefits to the taxpayer, and also in terms of meeting the promises that we were repeatedly given and to be funded any further. He, though, I think trusts the states to lead the way, and I really, really, really don't trust the states. They're the ones that have asked for more money, more flexibility, and they're the ones in charge of setting priorities, and their investments have produced these terrible results. So, Strong Towns is proposing keeping the federal gas tax and just sending it to the states, and I'm suggesting at this point just call it for a while. Make them make the case locally, and if people are comfortable locally with the garbage they've been given, that's on them. But I think we just might need to pause at the federal level altogether, because we just are getting far too little good to justify the incredible heaps of bad that we're getting.
Marisa, I think one of the things that this highlights, and I think, America Walks, we talk about pedestrian funding. We love safe routes to school. We also host folks that are looking to reconnect communities and remove highways. So there's a lot of folks out there who would be concerned about the loss of federal funding for a favorite thing if Beth's approach was adopted, right? If there were a pause and reauthorization at some point, not just a continuation. Um, That would mean no safe routes to school coordinators funded by the federal government, or no TAP or transit operators would not get money. I think this is kind of the challenge for advocates. What are your thoughts on that, if you care to share on that topic?
Sure. So I think state DOTs are not monolithic. We see some of them doing really amazing and exciting things with the resources that they're given. And I think particularly a lot of the folks who are on this call who are at who are within state DOTs are doing great work. So I want to just like name that. That being said, the things that we advocate for are really unique within federal transportation funding because they focus on getting funding to local communities. And one of the things that has created is that we look at a state like Washington State, where you live, Mike. Like the Safe Routes to School program was so successful when it was a standalone program from 2005 to 2012. The state continued its coordination of that within the state DOT. It showed such incredible results. It had such positive impacts on safety, on engagement, that the voters, both statewide and in the city of Seattle, have said we like this program so much, and we're not getting enough money from the federal government, that we want to levy for safe routes to school programs. We want this to be part of our state transportation package. And so we look at a city like Seattle that has made safe routes to school infrastructure improvements at every single public school. So I think we want to focus on federal transportation funding not as the be all and end all, but as one piece of the puzzle. And I think for many of you on this call, whether you are like an advocate or a champion, like thinking about like, this is one piece of it, and how do we use this to catalyze investment from our state? Or how do we use this to catalyze investment from our city to complement that federal funding or replace it altogether? Yeah.
No,
Sorry, can I just say one last thing?
yeah,
The other thing
sure.
I'll say in terms of like why these projects with local impact also matter to the process of reauthorization. So all of us as constituents, your voices are way more powerful than me as like the leader of a national nonprofit. They're like, yeah, this is what you're supposed to do. But when it's like a constituent from my neighborhood calling to say like, this matters, that's really important. So having people feel the impact. And then also very important are local elected officials. There was an experience of meeting with California's first congressional district, and it's represented by a Republican, and the staff are saying like, we don't care about this program, and saying, did you know you're the congressional district that has gotten the most transportation alternatives money in all of the US? Every congressional district has benefited, but you guys get the most. They were like, what? Okay, wait, can you have a mayor call our office and tell our boss that? And so just wanting to name, like, we all have a piece in this, but being able to like get your eyes or hands around like, this is what was funded, can be really strategic to the overall process.
So since Washington was called out, I want to react to both Marisa and Beth saying very, very important things. One is that, yes, money is spent at all levels. And remember that the federal isn't the be all and end all. So I'm going to anticipate the next question by just saying, advocate for your projects at every level. There is funding at every level. In fact, sometimes people will use the federal grant as a way to shunt you aside and say, oh, there's this grant you can apply for the feds for that. But if it's a truly important project, as Marisa pointed out, that's something the state or local government could fund with its own transportation dollars. So don't get caught in that trap, and pushing for local stuff really matters. Beth made a comment about Republicans and Democrats, which I also made me think of Washington. Washington is, in fact, its active transportation work is really fabulous. I think they're doing some of the leading work in the country. But its legislature has also embarked on a highway expansion project that makes it one of the worst in the country. In fact, Transportation for America has a great map that shows which states are doing a great job on focusing on fix it first rather than expansion. And that is not the good and bad states there do not track the blue and red states. Texas and Florida look horrible, and so does California and Washington look horrible in the highway expansion department. Some very red states look great in the fix it first department. So there are elements of this that are not at all partisan. and and shows that members of both parties can like the status quo. I think given the time, and we were kind of leading into this question, you led us right into it, Marisa. Given everything, what should advocates be doing right now? Was the question. So I'll throw it to you, Marisa, to expand or develop what you were saying further. And if you have very specific ones, specific marker bills you support, let people know, and then I'll throw it to Beth.
Yeah, sounds good. So I think big picture, think about what matters to you and let your member of Congress know. That's like at the end of the day, you have to decide like what is your approach? What do you believe? What we advocate for at the Safe Routes Partnership are some of those marker bills that I mentioned. And you can sign on in support of the idea of keeping strong funding for walking, biking, and safe routes to school, keeping a focus on safety for people walking and bicycling and outside of cars, and making sure that walking and biking are eligible across federal transportation programs, not just siloed into one little program. You can sign on in support of that by going to tinyurl.com/KAA sign on, and we can put that in the chat. And signing on as an organization says that you endorse those messages. Keep robust funding for walking and biking, keep a focus on safety for people outside of cars, make sure that walking and biking are broadly eligible across programs. And then I can put something else in the follow-up messages, but one of the most powerful things that you can do as a local advocate or champion, and even those of you who might work for a local government or health department and might be concerned about lobbying, something that you can do purely as education, so not lobbying, is invite your member of Congress to come see either an amazing project that you like, wow, this amazing crosswalk that got built, or come invite them on a walk audit and help them see this is not good enough. We need your focus and your investment. That is truly one of the most powerful things that everyday people can do. And you can, I'll drop a link in the chat, or I'll send it to Madeline about, we have a whole guide on how to reach out to your member of Congress and invite them to things. So I'll make sure that you get that. It can seem scary, but they're just regular people. So and it is our job as residents of this country to tell our elected members of Congress what matters to us. And so that's truly one of the most effective things you can do.
Beth, you're muted.
I think, Marisa said everything. You all need to figure out what matters most to you. And in my opinion, you should think about what the overall bill will do in terms of those priorities. This is my sixth reauthorization, going back to when I first came to DC in the mid-90s. And I can tell you that getting little programs to undo the damage of, programs that are orders of magnitude larger does not move the needle. And so I would just suggest that as you think about what your priorities are, think about it in terms of more than whether or not you get a tiny, tiny sliver of the pie, whether or not the whole pie is good for your priorities.
I am going to echo the comments about making sure that elected officials hear from you. I was an elected official. I was once mayor of Seattle, and I'll tell you, whenever I saw a letter, the very first thing that went across my brain was, who do they represent, and are they representing a significant amount of public opinion in my district? And obviously, national organizations like ours may have some influence because we're perceived as knowing about the issues. But let me tell you, if transportation ran on logic, this is not the system we would have. It runs on power, and that's what elected officials see. The beautiful thing is that people do actually, through voting, through expressing themselves on social media, and in making that connection to elected officials. One of the things that I've actually really enjoyed in my 25 plus years of climate and transportation advocacy is watching how the social media landscape has changed. Before there was gatekeeping by the media, Now we see YouTube videos and TikTok videos and Instagram reels and all sorts of information being shared with the public about how the world could look. And that's tremendously influential. So the conversation you have with your neighbors matters, but taking that conversation to elected officials through a walk audit, through a meeting in the district, is really powerful. And that operates on a deeper emotional level. And I'm going to put in a plug for the Week Without Driving, which America Walks co-hosts with the Non-Drivers Alliance. It's at the end of September, early October, where we urge elected and agency officials to attempt to spend a week without their vehicle to see how the world works for people that do not drive. We had over 700 elected and agency officials participate last year. Over 500 organizations joined in. And you can join in as an agency can join in because it's just purely sharing information and educational. An advocacy organization could join in and maybe target it towards a specific topic that they want the elected official to focus in on. But we find that there's lots of ways to have your voice heard. And I will say that's upstream of everything. And that is the most critical thing right now. At some point, and you may have, we kind of were getting at this a little bit, when the decision of what is good enough, because no bill that comes through Congress is ever perfect. There's always trade-offs. When are the trade-offs okay and when are they not? When do you have to take what you can get because you don't have enough power to change anything? And when do you withdraw because it's not where you think it should be? That's pretty far downstream right now, but it is an important question for people to think about in terms of how they're positioning themselves and talking to their members of Congress about what they would find unacceptable as well as what they would love. So I kind of stole the last word from you guys a little bit. Is that okay? Yeah. Yeah. Just trying to say, get engaged. Really, just trying to say, get engaged. Now's the time. Thank you to our partners. We're really grateful to our major partners that help fund our work. These are, foundations and great organizations that have shared objectives, as we do. And you're probably our most important partner right now. If you're listening to this, you care about the information we share, you care about the advocacy we do, please consider becoming a donor or a monthly donor to America Walks. The unrestricted dollars you give us are so critical because it gives us the freedom to talk about any topic we care about and try to represent the views of the hundreds of local advocacy organizations out there that are pushing for more walkable communities. We love our big partners, but their dollars often comes with specific deliverables that we have to work on, whereas the unrestricted funding you give us really allows us to raise and speak up. And if you liked what you heard from Beth and Marisa, support them as well. So thank you, everybody, for joining us for this webinar.